All right. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our the next in our Athletics Canada coaching webinar series. We're calling this one Just Say Yes to Para-Athletics Coaching. I'm John Franco, the manager of coaching education with Athletics Canada. Kyle Smith is our coaching coordinator. He's in the background and he's going to be fielding your questions. If you have questions for our esteemed panel, I'll introduce them shortly, but just first a couple of the usual housekeeping things. You're muted. If you have questions, you can put them in the question box. So we've got some prepared questions, a little discussion we're going to have, and then 15 minutes or maybe a little more, depending, maybe a little less, depending. We will have to answer your questions. Vous pouvez aussi demander des questions en français et je vais traduire. Mark and Jen, I don't know if you speak French or not, but if you don't and someone asks a French question, I can translate, so it's all good. We're recording the webinar and it will be posted in the coming days on the Athletics Canada YouTube channel, where you can see all of our webinars. So if you've ever missed one or you're looking for something interesting to watch, there's all kinds of good stuff there. And for coaches who entered their NCCP number and are NCCP certified, you will receive 1 PD point for your participation in this webinar today. We are planning on having one more webinar in April, and the topic is yet to be determined, but watch the AC social accounts and our coaching newsletter for details in the coming week. And I guess 2 more points. I'm going to share 2 links in the chat. So I'm going to pop those in the chat right now. Since we're talking about para, I just wanted to share some para resources for coaches. In the locker, there's an e-learning called Coaching Athletes with a Disability, and it's a great first step if you're kind of interested and want to learn more about that space. And next, so that course starting next year will be part of our coaching pathway. So new coaches who start to, in the sport club coach pathway are going to, it's going to be a required course. So we're going to have that in our pathway, and we're going to have our own Becoming Para Ready e-learning for coaches as well. And lastly, but definitely not least, next Thursday, so a week from tonight, we're hosting another sort of para update. The para development department with Fanny Smith is hosting this. It's going to be about classification. So the registration link is also in the chat, and you can also find that on AC socials and in the para newsletter. Well, on our coaching newsletter, we actually have it too. So that's it. So lots of stuff, lots of different things for people to do. But let's get started. So we have with us Jen Wood and Mark Miller, 2 coaches athletics coaches who coach para athletes. And I'll let you introduce yourselves and just sort of your background sort of generally, and then maybe you can kind of go into how you got into the para side of things. Jen, do you want to start?
So I'm Jen Wood, and I am from Saskatchewan. I have a really fun, diverse background that started in softball about 20 years ago. So I was trained as a level 3 coach in softball. I'm a mom. I have 2 boys. My oldest just became a paramedic this week, which is kind of exciting. So to get right into it, I got a new job in 2018 working in disability sports. And the year after, there was 4 kids that wanted to go and wheelchair race at a Western Canada Games. And I had a lot of games experience. I've coached at 2 different Canada Summer Games in softball. So they said, hey, do you want to take on these kids? And I said, sure. And so I jumped right in with these 4 athletes. And I had no experience, but I was familiar with equipment. I'd worked as an occupational therapy assistant and a physio assistant for a while. So it's kind of, I just jumped right in and took on these 4 athletes and attended a Western Canada Games 3 months later. And that began my journey into para coaching and athletics.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Jen. So that's Jen and Mark Miller. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, folks. My name is Mark Miller. I live in St. John's, Newfoundland. I coach a lot of things. Also a professional firefighter full time. So I coach at the university here. I just coached the cross country team. I started coaching track and field about 12 or 13 years ago. As I got more involved in a small place like this, you take on a lot of roles. And there was someone from our rehab clinic who came to me just before the 2017 Canada Games and said, we got a young man who's interested in learning how to wheelchair race, and would you be interested in taking him on? And I said, why not? And then our program kind of grew from there. And now we have several wheelchair athletes and a couple ambulatory runners and some para throwers. So it just kind of grew organically. Yeah, so here I am 5 or 6 years later, coaching para and able-bodied athletics.
That's great. So that actually is a great segue to my first question is, what do your training groups look like? Are they integrated, able-bodied and para together, or sort of a parallel thing, or is it separate where it's like, okay, you're coaching the para athletes here and then the able-bodied athletes over here? How do you work that that sort of group dynamic with since coaching different groups, Mark?
Yeah, great question. So I coach in kind of two different formats. One, I would say, I think you used the term parallel. So I coach my wheelchair athletes that I coach in parallel with groups. So I like to have them at the track at the same time as other athletes because we're one club and they all participate in athletics. But I would say I would call it more parallel in the sense that our wheelchair practices are very different from our middle distance or our sprints or our hurdles practice. You can't really integrate them too well. However, we do have several athletes that are ambulatory runners or para throwers, and we just integrate them right into our programs. Whatever level they're at, if they're grassroots or if they're, say, a little bit more high performance, then they'll work in those groups. But because there's so much similarity, I mean, mostly all of their training crossover between the able-bodied athletes. So in my experience, integrating them has been by far the most positive experience. So yeah, we run a parallel and an integrated program.
Cool. Jen, what do your training groups look like?
I'd say mine is still quite different. We're still segregated. We're working very hard towards more of that parallel training. In our northern field house, we're actually not allowed on the track with our wheelchair racers until the facility's closed. So you're not even in the facility when other people are physically there. Our throwers, like our seated throwers and ambulatory throwers, are being right integrated into clubs this year especially. And they're training parallel to the other athletes, just waiting for some equipment to arrive so that we can make that happen in a better way. But that's moving forward very, very well. A lot of my athletes are all over the province, and sometimes his athlete Gavin even joins us on Zoom. So that's one way we've kind of found that we can bring them together. I do find my kids are also missing that team atmosphere. You get to go to Canada Games as a big team, but a lot of these athletes in Saskatchewan are still training very independently and alone. So just finding creative ways to bring them together. And we are making great progress, like lots of conversations with our clubs. But right now, my kids are pretty segregated still.
Well, yeah, interesting. Yeah, you mentioned the Zoom. That's it's a really sort of one of those things that kind of came out of the pandemic that we figured out that you can kind of keep using. It's kind of a good tool.
Yeah.
So when you started, what were some challenges that you faced and how did you overcome them? Because it sounds like both of you were sort of basically just voluntold to do this, but how did you, what were some challenges you faced?
Yeah, so when I started, I knew nothing. I had been involved in some basketball coaching and some wheelchair basketball, just as a volunteer. But outside of that, it wasn't a world that I was familiar with. So that was probably the biggest obstacle to start, is just really not knowing where to start. But I was fortunate enough to get a lot of help from the rehab center here in St. John's. But the biggest challenge I found was not necessarily the coaching piece. Coaching an athlete was not that familiar, but equipment and getting access to equipment. And Jen knows this story all too well. We because we didn't have a specialist here to size wheelchairs, we had someone do it from away. And right now we're dealing with one of our athletes who's kind of transitioning to a high performance I guess, career in athletics, and he didn't get a chair that is going to work for him. So not knowing the equipment was probably the bigger challenge.
Mhm.
And then outside of that, really just having to be more of an advocate for the sport and athletes than you've had to do in the past was a transition, but it was something that I wouldn't say it was easy to transition into, but it was easy to buy into, having to do that more for your athletes, knowing that there's a few more barriers to access in the sport.
Hmm. About you, Jen?
That's a good point about barriers. I do think there are a lot. Equipment is one of those things that I agree with Mark. I had no idea what I was doing, even though I was semi-familiar with chairs. I was very lucky that Paralympian Jessica Fraughton lived in my same city. So I picked her brain as much as I could. She was still training. So, and preparing for her high performance career as well. So I didn't want to bother her too much. I did get in touch with her coach, Rick Reilly, also. And that was, trial by fire. Let's figure this out. Jen, he helped me get my toolkit together and tried to do some of the adjustments on the chairs. But it's definitely a challenge. I was also very new to the track world because I had come from a team event. So I was also learning track and field at the same time and the rules of the track and things like that. And I know at our first competition, they had said that this track was going to be very accessible, but there was a 1 foot step to go to the athlete check-in. So again, the athletes had to go through the front gate instead of being able to go to the tent, and they couldn't get on the podium. So some of those little challenges too are just things that when you don't know, you don't know, and to work through and like Mark said, just keep persevering for the athletes to have, a great experience in athletics.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. So my next question was, what made you keep at it? I mean, I guess that's a good answer, just, for the athletes. I guess to kind of add to that, like, what sort of strategies did you use to overcome these barriers and to get sort of, more, like Mark, you're talking about being an advocate, like more buy-in and understanding from the community, and or just, straight up like budget for chairs, that kind of thing. Like, how did you solve some of these problems?
Um, Having people in the community that have experience in para athletics in other fields. So we had a lot of experience in the community in para swimming. Like bocce is big here. So getting like you don't have to rewrite the book on a lot of this stuff. It's just maybe there's barriers within your own sport, but there's other sports that are doing it well. So I was fortunate enough to have contacts in other sports that shared their experiences with me. And then, within the sporting community, our provincial sporting organization maybe was a little bit hesitant at first to kind of start this integrated model of having para events and able-bodied events at the same time. But you work with them, not kind of against them. And then once the personalities come in and everybody kind of falls in love with the athletes the same way that you do as a coach, it gets a lot easier. So it took a lot of patience on my part, but a lot of help from within the community of people who have done it before. So I would say that would be the biggest strategy, is that I got a lot of help from other people.
Yeah, for sure. Jen, what about you?
I like the perseverance. I think you just have to keep plugging away, knowing that your ultimate goal is to, give these athletes an opportunity. And I agree with Mark, our provincial sport body has just come together with us in an amazing way and support a lot of the initiatives we're doing. And even though some of the on-track time isn't quite as integrated, lots of events are happening. We can pick and choose what we want to do at competitions. It's just, and the sport community, disability sport community is small. There's a lot of athletes participating in multiple sports and lots of different experiences. And you do have coaches out there who've done a lot of work with para athletes, and to connect with them, to connect with your disability sport group, but ultimately to work together, creating that environment for the athletes that and you're right, people do fall in love with them. Like, they're athletes, they're great kids, great adults, they just want to train and participate in this sport too.
Yeah, Saskatchewan, I guess, has a couple good people there with Carla and Rick that been around the block a few times, so it's good people to connect with. So I see just a question from Stuart McGregor, Paralympian. Do you often involve experts in the accessibility field and or previous para-athletes to help assist and grow your program? I think the answer is yes, but maybe you can kind of share some examples of that.
I think they're the best people to demonstrate skills. I can't fit into half the racers to even, so I can talk about it, but I can't get in there and I can't show hand positioning or how to transfer. And so I use Jessica a lot. I have her record videos of how to transfer that I can send to rehab facilities. I think it's really important to have people around who have that lived experience, who can talk to the athletes, not only about the sport, but the other things involved with skincare and those other, you know, medical issues that may come into play. But yeah, all the time, I think it's critical to have the athletes around. Our other coach is in the Cyclones Athletic in Saskatchewan, was a wheelchair racer as well. So she's still actively involved too in our coaching, which is fantastic to give that perspective.
Yeah. What's the thing called again that you put in your hands there?
Like the pusher?
No, click it or what this
Twister?
Clister. Yeah. It's funny you say like you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So I also was coaching some wheelchair athletes for a bit there, and so you know every athlete's different, right? And so one athlete was sort of probably needing this Clister a little bit, but Lee, the more experienced athlete I work with, he just doesn't use it, and he never had. So he didn't occur to him to kind of like think of that because he just does. It's like the one thing he doesn't have in his like gigantic toolbox, right? So it's just sort of like, yeah, I think it was like when we were on this like group chat and you mentioned it or Megan mentioned it, and I was like, what is that? And then I'm like, oh, okay, I learned this, and then we kind of started to that sort of solved a little problem that we had. So yeah, it's always good to hear from people who know and have done it. So that's good. Mark, would you have any experiences like that?
So we have a major gap there was a generation, say 20, 30 years ago, where there was some para-athletes here, but there was a pretty big gap. And I don't know if it happened in coaching or just within athletics. But when I first started, I didn't have someone to go to. But then my first experience really realizing how important it was to be around lived experience was when I went to I think it was the most recent Canada Games, 2022. And like the field, especially on the men's side, was huge. And watching at that time, I only was there with one athlete, and watching his growth and the amount that he learned in like the 4 days that we were at Canada Games, it was just like so apparent to me how much more you can learn from, from just being around people who live it. And like just the way he turned his chair that week, just the way he raised, I mean, he dropped all this time, and it had nothing to do with anything other than, just being immersed in it. So that's like, it was a great question and just such a good point.
Yeah. So kind of on the flip side of that, how did your coaching education, this is obviously my area here, help prepare you or not for your roles in coaching para athletics? And you could say that it didn't. That's okay.
There wasn't any.
Yeah.
I found it really hard to find information. I was fortunate that I had a long-standing background, old level 3, in coaching. So, you're a coach, but it was very, very hard to find good information just on the different things like seated throws and wheelchair racing were more where my focus was. So that was really hard at first. Definitely coming, it's getting amazingly better. So I actively had to search out a mentor to teach me. So as part of the apprentice program with Athletics Canada, I pretty much requested that I could have Carla Nickel just to guide me through this para system. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Mark, about you? I mean, I remember we did your evaluation and we didn't really talk about para back then. So
no. I would say my coaching education probably didn't fully prepare me for para athletics. And it prepares you to be a coach, and I guess kind of like sidebar, I think the transition to being a coach that understands that there's grassroots level and high performance level, and then carrying that mindset into para was really important. So, you know, my experience in coaching and my education in coaching got me prepared to coach athletes, but not necessarily any para education. Like Jen said, it's getting really good, and it seems like Athletics Canada is really making an effort. I found YouTube, like, so I couldn't even find text. Like, there's not a lot of research in para athletics. Like right now, there's so much science in sport and so much analytics, and there's still not that much with para athletes. But YouTube is pretty good. So there's some pretty good YouTube channels, but again, those are unsanctioned and just on the internet. But I did get a lot of education by some people on YouTube.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, like it is true that you know, in the past it's not been much. We're definitely working on it. There is now a sort of a seated throws module that's been delivered. There's a wheelchair racing club coach you know, a technical module, I guess it's just wheelchair racing club coach. And actually, so Carmen asked the question, are there any coming up? Indeed, there are in Edmonton, April 27th and 28th. And Jen, I believe you're going to be leading that, co-leading that for us. So, you know, if people are interested in you know, and actually in learning and to getting a, you know, a head start on even what these two fantastic coaches had, you know, that's a good chance. I think so. I'm going to just try to put this in the main chat, the just the registration for the event in Edmonton, if you're able to make it there. And this is just sort of the beginning. Obviously, you know, we want this to be accessible in all the provinces, and it's, you know, it's essentially just part of our regular coaching education now, that this wheelchair option. So we want to work hard to make sure that that's available for everyone. And as I mentioned off the top, you know, we're revising the coaching education to include those, you know, coaching athlete with a disability e-learnings, becoming para-ready e-learnings, and all of our content, or technical content, is sort of, we're including, you know, para where necessary and where it applies. And I think, you know, one of the things, and you know, maybe this is a question I'll ask you both. I mean, aside from wheelchair racing, because obviously that's a pretty specific thing, but for the ambulatory, you know, that, like, how much would you say it's like actually that different, you know, from coaching, you know, Olympic stream runners, you know, other than each athlete's a little bit different regardless?
I think it comes down to maybe you need a little piece of equipment off of a start, or
Mhm.
a lot of it is just how you would have a conversation with your ambulatory athlete. You're going to have a conversation with your para athlete about what do they need. Can, you know, can both hands reach the ground? Am I weaker on one side? It's just, the technique is the same, I would say. It's just you're making these little modifications that make sense for each individual athlete, because they are going to be very, very individual. But, you know, I think they can fit right into a training program. We have a wonderful new visually impaired thrower in our province now, who've been training with a club. But yeah, you just make those little modifications or cues for each athlete.
Makes sense. Mark, you talked a bit about how you know, you have people training together.
Yeah, I mean, it really, it's like coaching any athlete, really. Everybody has their own eccentricities and differences, and you know, you analyze what an athlete's doing, and you adapt. In para, that's probably a little bit more imperative, but it really, like, when it boils down to it, it's coaching. That's what you're doing, and it's the same game, and it's just as fun.
Yeah, for sure. So what advice then would you have for coaches who are interested in coaching para? What do you think if that coach should do? How do they get going?
Do it. Just say yes. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that how easy it really is when you just look at each individual as an athlete. And I do think with our Becoming Para Ready program, and with Fanny doing so much work on the para side, and our national team starting to share so much information with us too, that it's just becoming a lot easier. So if you want to do it, just reach out, and there's athletes around. And like Mark said, you might need to reach into some of these groups in the community, or have a little try-it event. But if you're interested, pursue it.
Yeah, I would say also definitely just, if you coach athletics and you coach an event, if you coach throws, or if you coach running, you have a para-athlete, really there is no difference. So it is good to say yes. But another thing I would say is, the barriers that you may experience as a coach getting into para are, you might have to write some more grants because you have to get more equipment. You have to understand the rules a little bit differently because every event might have its own specific rules within para. All those little pieces can be daunting, or can be a barrier for a coach to get involved, because you're already doing more than get paid for if you get paid. So define how you're going to get help with those things if you're getting into it. There are people that are willing to help, usually the parents. I shouldn't say usually, but oftentimes the parents or people within the disability community or parasport community. But you don't have to do it alone. And so if you feel like that's the biggest barrier, having to take on that alone, define the parameters that you can handle. And usually that's just coaching, or maybe it's a little bit of grant writing or whatever it is. But ask for help, and you don't have to do it alone, because it's worth it for you, and it's definitely worth it for the athlete to make sure that they get the help. And so asking for help sometimes it's hard for us to do, but if it means it takes down a barrier for an athlete, that would be my biggest piece of advice.
AC might also know someone in your community who has done some work with it. So if you're not, familiar, or you're in a bigger athletics community and who knows, they have those contacts too in the provinces now that you can reach out to, or someone else you can reach out to as well, give you, some assistance as you get going.
Yeah, for sure. I think just, reach out, ask for help. Like our email address is really easy, coaching@athletics.ca, and they'll, Kyle will answer and get you to the right person. And yeah, it's we're here to help. I think that's it. And the provincial branches are as well. If you're a coach in athletics, you probably are connected with your provincial branch, and I think by and large now they're connected. If not, it's different in different, some provinces it's different. Like in some cases, I think you both spoke about sort of like the disability sport organizations, and that in some cases there are those sort of disability specific organizations in provinces that work with people, and sometimes it's actually the athletics provincial branch that is kind of working with para. So it's good to kind of figure out what your situation is, and yeah, in other sports, like because I think one thing, maybe a coach is sitting there going, well, okay, but there aren't any athletes. Like, oh, but I think they're out there. It's, I think, more a question of, it's sort of a catch-22 thing where like someone will come and say, oh, can I do this? And then there's no coach willing to say yes, and then they kind of go away, and then the coach is like, oh, maybe I'll do this, but then at that moment there's no one, but there was someone, and there will be for sure. So just have to sort of stay vigilant and stay on it. And I mean, that's one of the things in the Becoming Para Ready sort of document, is just about how you set up your club to be, very explicitly open, not just assuming that like, yes, of course we can coach para athletes, but like saying like, we coach para athletes. Because it's not a competition, but in a sense we're in competition with other sports, but not really, because you can often cross over and do a couple sports. And if you get an athlete, then like you already know they're an athlete, so they can definitely transition to track and field. Like our sport is pretty, there's lots of different events, so you can find somewhere to fit. Like one of the wheelchair athletes that I was coaching was in sledge hockey, right? So she's already doing sports, and that's sort of her winter sport, and then she can come and do wheelchair racing in the summer. It's a nice match. My next question would be, is there a situation, you know, and maybe it's not, but maybe there is where it might be right for a coach to say no, this isn't going to work. And then if so, like, then what, you know, what would you do in that case if that actually exists?
I don't think we can say no to anybody. I think it's I think if that was me walking into a club, especially as someone with a disability already, you're putting yourself out there to come out and say, hey, and even if I'm not the one who can physically support you in my club or as an athlete, let's figure it out. I said, like, my career in para is built on duct tape and zip ties. Like, we're gonna figure this out, and it might not be with me, but let's figure it out. And just to not be turning away people that want to be involved.
Mm.
And like I said, there's so many classifications. You might already have athletes in your club that you don't even know classify in para. So just that awareness, I just think it's important. I don't think we can say no. I just don't think we can.
Yeah, I would say, you know, if you don't have the time, space, or effort or equipment to do it, maybe there's a world where you can say, maybe I'm not the person to help you, but you know, you do have to be part of the solution. If there's an athlete coming to you to look to participate, you gotta figure something out. So knowing, you know, knowing who to talk to, or even being able to refer someone to the provincial sporting body is the least you can do. But you know, I think maybe the only appropriate time is no, but I can help you.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's why it's just say yes. Just say yes. Don't say no. Say yes. Yeah, no, but that's it. Like this, I think that's it. Like, you know, it's as a coach, like, you know, for sure. Like that, I mean, if people come to, you know, my training group or whatever, and it just like, you know, like, no, I'm not the right person to coach you, but this person can coach you. You know, like there's always like there's, you know, we have lots of coaches, we have lots of different scenarios, and there are a lot of resources out there. So it's really it's up to the coach to, you know, to become sort of informed, at least to the point where you can, you know, refer people and make sure, like, as you said, Jen, if someone is like, you know, coming to say like, hey, I want to do track and field, like, then don't let them leave without trying track and field, right? It's it's a great opportunity for, and I think, you know, we haven't really talked about this, but I know like when Bob Westman talked to our performance coach class once about coaching para, and you know, he put it as like it's such a it's problem solving, like coaching is problem solving, but it's new problems that you probably haven't experienced before. So it's going to be a, you know, an experience where you can grow, and it's, you know, so it's going to be really interesting. And so kind of on that note, we've alluded to it a little bit, but I wanted to get, if we can, somewhat specific about equipment and equipment issues. So Jen, can you maybe, like, not take too long here, but just kind of give us like a rundown of the equipment that you have, and aside from your, you know, your zip ties and your roll of duct tape, like the kind of things that you have in your toolbox, and the sorts of like the adjustments or things that need to be done, you know, for wheelchair racers, and maybe, you know, for, we can talk about the seated throws too a bit.
So there's a few different types of the racers. So to have some awareness of, like, who can kneel, does their body work for that, or can they only sit? And then different types of foot plates that can be attached to that, because you always want them nice and snug in their chair. So you're always looking at a variety of strapping that you can add. We do use a lot of foam. Go to Canadian Tire, so you can pad the sides of chairs. The majority of the equipment's not going to fit. It's just standard sizing that you try to get for the athletes. So it's a lot of trying to fix them in there with stuff like that. We do a lot of work with their steering. So adjusting their compensator on the track so they can turn corners. Wheel alignments are important, so their tires aren't, you know, pushing against each other or out too far. That would be another key thing. We do make all of our athletes, as they get going, have a toolkit. It's important for them to know how to take care of their chair. They get to learn how to change tires. We always have a pump on hand for athletes that aren't able to use like a traditional standing pump. They'll get an electric pump that they'll carry around in their kit as well, so they're able to pump their tires. So that would just be a few of the things that, you know, always have your tape, and just we get a nice little, we give the athletes each a list of what equipment the tools they'll need for the year, and it just becomes part of their training bag.
Allen keys. That was the thing I
Allen-
realized. You gotta have the whole full set of Allen keys.
Yeah. You know, and they never have just one kind. They use like
No.
2 different measurements for,
Mhm.
you know, things that are right beside each other, the same
Yeah.
chair, because it's
Yeah.
genius. Velcro always comes in handy. Biggest things you just don't want athletes rubbing. There's lots of metal on the chairs, lots of rough edges, lots of old equipment. It's
Mhm.
very expensive. There's a couple places that we order from in the States, Carbon Bike and Top End. I still wouldn't want to put in an order form completely by myself. I would also want assistance doing that. So the new throwing frames we can get in Canada, and they come with the Allen key, which is also genius. And they're quite adjustable. Like we get the adjustable so that the kids, you know, whoever's coming out can try and be comfortable.
Anything to add to that, Mark?
I do, and only because it's new to me this year. But we got trainers, so we got rollers, indoor.
There you go.
rollers.
Yeah.
And you know, a game changer. We haven't been able to use them too much this year just because our wheelchair racers have been busy this winter. But yeah, I feel like it's a game changer. We don't have a ton of access to our indoor track, so we managed to get a couple for our club, and yeah, just
And there's small
Good luck.
ones.
Well,
What your club got were the small portable ones. So
yes.
I actually traveled with mine to Canada Games in a bag because they come apart. And then there's
Wow.
great big, huge, like 6 foot. That'll work with the big drum too, but the
Yeah.
portable ones work great if you set them up right.
Oh, yeah, that's the rollers we have was the 2 really big ones.
Yeah.
And they're big and heavy.
Very.
But and the other thing to think about too, like as with the chairs, the rollers are kind of all different as well. Like even at one point we had switched sort of one chair from one roller to another roller, and it was a whole different feel. Like it was just different. Like it was like harder to push. It was something, I don't know what it was, but it was just different. So the athletes need to be either, you know, able to switch around, or just like, you know, get them used to the one, and you know that that's the one they're going to have. We have a question on this topic. In small, this comes from Karen Natho. In small communities, we have trouble finding someone to repair our chairs and hand cycles at a reasonable price. Brakes, compensator, wheel alignment. This is a large barrier for us. Any suggestions?
Is it broken or does it just need adjusting? Because if it's adjusting, it's something that we can all learn. And we actually have a genius right now racing. His name is Austin Smink, and we're trying to convince him to do a YouTube video because he can adjust all the things. So I think it's a difference of if you need a welder and major repairs, or if you're just going through and doing all of those adjustments and getting everything happy or replacing parts. Because that's something I've kind of learned over time, is just how to do those things if there's not a bike shop handy that's familiar.
Yeah. And one thing she mentioned that we haven't really explicitly talked about is compensator. Mark, do you want to tell everybody what a compensator is if they don't know?
Yeah, so if you're a wheelchair racer, and you are racing athletics on a 400-meter or 200-meter track, the compensator allows you to steer on the turns and then adjust to go straight on the straightaways. But every track is a little bit different and every lane is a little bit different. So you spend a lot of time with an athlete adjusting for their lane or the new track. And especially like here, we have an indoor track, so we're going indoor to outdoor. That's massive. So really understanding how to make those adjustments, and understanding how the springs work on that. It's important because it can be very frustrating for athletes, any para-athlete, when they have to wait because someone can't necessarily help them with an issue equipment wise or whatever it may be. That can be a big barrier and frustrating for athletes. So it's really, really important to know those things. I know that doesn't necessarily answer the question from the audience, John, but yeah, that's what a compensator is. And it's a very valuable tool for the athlete. So it's good for the coach to understand it.
Yeah, I mean, Jen mentioned bike shops. I think that's, you know, the sort of the go-to, because it's, you know, usually people who work in bike shops they kind of know their way around various equipments. And I'm sure if you brought them a wheelchair and said, I need to make this do this, then they could probably figure it out. But yeah, for sure. I mean, not every small town's gonna have a bike shop though. So it's you might have to travel to get things done, and that's more
Some of our athletes
cost.
are like my one athlete who got a new chair in November. I didn't see her until 2 weeks ago.
Hmm.
So, it's hard to try and do that stuff over Zoom and stuff. Well, when you're far away from them sometimes. So just when you can get together, as much information as you can kind of find. A lot of the adjustments and stuff as well will be covered in the club coach course. So that will actually go over a whole racer also as part of that. So that'll be kind of cool. And the wheel alignments and stuff like that, just to get that information more up there.
Mhm.
John, one thing we do, and this again, probably this may not answer the question, but we're fortunate enough to have held on to every racing chair that we've ever used.
Hmm.
So I mean, racing chairs are very specific to the athletes using them, and that's very important to acknowledge. However, it's like a scrap car yard.
Hmm.
We do have spare pieces available, and typically if we order an athlete wheels, we order them two different types of wheels. So just having extra equipment around is very helpful. Again, if you're on a tight budget and if you're in a community that doesn't have access to purchasing these things, it might not help. But it's like anything, if you have more than one tool, it's always going to help. Or if you have a backup, wheel
Yeah.
or whatever, it can save you some time. So if your chair's out of commission, you can at least keep it going while you do send it away.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good point. Sure. Cool. Anything else on equipment? Can you think of anything that we didn't cover? I mean,
The visual impairment tethers, those are a nice
Oh.
a little piece for if you have a visually impaired athlete who might
Yeah.
require an assistant, that would be another
Mhm.
piece.
A guide, yeah.
Yeah, for their guide.
Mhm.
A lot of the throws, the club would be a different piece of equipment for throwers. There's a different category for someone who doesn't have a lot of hand function. It's called a club. So it's a long, it almost looks like a fish bat that's weighted, so you can hold on to the end of that. So that's a different piece to have that can expand people who could throw in your area.
Mm.
Yeah.
Prosthetics are like a whole nother field of equipment that I don't have any experience with, other than this year we had a kind of triathlon and we had a young woman show up with she was an amputee and she had a high performance prosthetic, which was really cool, which kind of allowed me to start thinking about it and doing a little bit of research. But that's a pretty intense field of equipment, and it's pretty technical, but it's really interesting. I can't offer any expertise on it, but it's neat. And then the other piece of equipment that I know is gaining a little bit of steam within the para world are frames for frame running.
Mm.
So they're kind of a wheeled frame that you can do a running event for athletes that may not necessarily have the ability to stand upright.
Mm.
So that's just another interesting piece of equipment that if you can have it at a facility in your province, super helpful for athletes to gain access to the sport.
Yeah. Yeah, so like speaks to what Jen said before, like there are lots of different classifications and event groups and stuff. And so it's if having that is gonna, open a door and create an opportunity for someone to join, that's great. And it is relatively new. I think it's only been, well, I think it's at the Olympics this time, sort of the Paralympics for like the first time. So it's pretty new part of the para world. So kind of related to this, and so this is one of the audience questions that came in sort of when someone registered. Just what suggestions do you have on how and who to reach out to in order to generate interest in taking part in parasport? And so I wanted to add a little bit to this one too, because we mentioned visually impaired, like if you have any experience also in recruiting guides, because that's one element in sort of generating interest is also in this particular role of guide is someone who's doing the sport but then is also going to act as a guide for visually impaired. So it's sort of two questions, but I wanted to talk about the guide as well, so I think it sort of fits there.
we did a series of triad events last year where we partnered our club, Cyclones Athletics, Saskatchewan Wheelchair Sports, Sask Athletics, and there was a grant available from Athletics Canada so that we could do these things. And we used the Para-Ready manual and the wheelchair racing manual and Rose manual and the classification sheet, and spent some time before any athletes came just meeting with all the coaches. And we created a resource for them and kind of went through it and answered lots of questions just to sort of go over a bunch of that. And then we had some of our experienced athletes there, but also opened it up to just absolutely anybody who wanted to come out and just have a try day. So some of the coaches, then we tried to get them to work with the new athletes. It was really fun. We actually recruited a couple athletes from that who are doing very, very well nationally now. And a guide came forward about 2 months ago. He sent an email to Fanny at AC with the paramanager. So I think that whole becoming para-ready program really helped to get that interest out there and to generate information. And we were sending information to a lot of the clubs in the province who then had that to share and ask questions. And we put the contacts in there for how to get in touch with different groups to ask more questions.
Cool.
Yeah, I would, my answer would be very similar to Jen's. We had the same opportunity last year to work with Athletics Canada and have a para-ready day. And just advertising that alone, the most common groups to reach out to me were disability groups from either the rehab center at the hospital, Parasport, Newfoundland, Labrador. We had a visually impaired athletic association that I didn't even know existed participate. So putting the information out there, you know, people ended up coming to me, but it seemed like the groups where these people, the organizers of these organizations, they're looking for places for their members to participate. So don't be afraid to reach out to organizations, you know, within the community. As far as guiding goes, we haven't had any athletes kind of stick with it, but we had a lot of uptake when we asked for on our triad day for guides for visually impaired athletes, just because people were like, hey, that sounds like fun, something I can help. I know, you know, further up you go, you have to really pair people appropriately with their pacing.
Yeah, you gotta kind of be good if you want
Yeah.
to keep up. So it's
yeah, we had pretty good uptake. People like to help, so
yeah, that's good. Yeah, cool. Okay, I know that this is a pretty specific question. And this is a person from Ontario, but I'm not sure that I mean, there might be some Ontario specific things that they might need to know, but so this is the question is that I have a student who is a quadruple amputee and wanting to join the track and field team this year. He's just interested in competing in the standing shot put and the 100 meters. What can I do as his teacher and coach to best prepare him for a positive experience?
I think you need a lot more information before I could answer that. Age of the athlete, how much of their residual limbs are left? Are they able to stand? Can they grasp an implement? So I think I would just need more background information. It would be a really deep conversation with that athlete of what they're actually physically capable of doing. Can you even hold on to a shot put? And if you can, awesome. Let's find a way to do that. Can you stand? I don't know how much of their limbs are left on the lower extremities. So I think it would just be a conversation. And then maybe if those events don't work for you, what will work for you? Can we figure out something that will, you know, you could be successful in?
Yeah, makes sense.
I would say Jen's points are really good. You really need to know more about the athlete, but I alluded to it earlier. One of the biggest frustrations I've had with para athletes is when you show up to, say, an event or you're helping them on the track and there are people around that may not know the rules, may not know how an amputee is supposed to start, may try to apply rules differently to a para athlete. So just assuming that maybe they can get practice set up with this athlete and then getting them to the event, making sure the race organizers and the officials at the race know that, you know, if they're not experienced in para, just know that there may be a para athlete there. So that, you know, they're prepared to know the rules around them competing. And then on top of that, making sure your athlete is briefed on how everything's going to roll out. I think like a big barrier, or one of the things we try to do most with all of our athletes, is just make sure their first experience is positive. Whether it's the most informative experience or not, I don't think fully matters. But so just making sure that that first day and that first meet at the track is organized from both ends, from the athlete's expectations and then the meet organizer's expectations, because you want to set them up for a fun day.
And I found a lot of meet organizers, when our athletes are brand new, are very lenient with us, and just letting them have a good experience, you know, in that first event. The wheelies are not going to stay in their lane. And you know, this athlete might need a different way to start, or start closer. Like, I don't know, but they're pretty good if you have those conversations. You know, Mark's had that experience too. Like, they're pretty good.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So this brings up another point, and I know, Jen, we have communicated about this before. Like, how long does it take before the wheelchair athlete figures out how to stay in their lane? Because it's that's like one of the big challenges, is like going straight for 100 meters is sort of like the first thing. And like,
Yeah.
remember the first time that the athletes I was coaching did that, we were like, yeah. It I think, just to sort of to the previous point, and just generally, like, it's important to set kind of appropriate expectations of like what is going to happen, not for any reason of like because they have a disability, but because this is like a new thing. It's a new sport, new skills. So I don't know, is there like a usual timeline for that, or
I think everyone's different. I had a new paraplegic jump in and pretty much do it on his first try. But I've also had kids, some kids have coordination disorder as well, or they don't use their hands together. One arm is stronger than the other. So it's just kind of playing with that compensator to stay straight as you can, and really just working on technique of getting on that push rim with two hands. And I just think everyone's very, very different in that development.
Yeah. In my experience, I tried to, when I was first coaching it, I really tried to tackle it as just solely just a technical issue, that I just wouldn't get the compensator right. And that wasn't the case at all. And again, this speaks to the very first question, which may be the best point made here, is that lived experience is definitely the best teacher. So when we finally went away to some meets and we watched people performing or staying in their lane, you realize maybe it's more of an art than a science. And once some of our athletes realized that, they really kind of got their own groove, and they just like intuitively picked it up, like you would any other sport when you watch any other athlete do something. So the timeline is impossible to guess, but it is in my experience maybe more of an art than a science.
Yeah, that's great to hear that. And I think just for coaches out there who are going to start, and that's your experience was exactly mine. I was like, okay, like, well, how did I mess this up? Like, did I turn this the wrong way? What did I do wrong here? And I mean, probably there were several things I did wrong, but I think, yeah, like when they got it, it was not because like, oh yeah, the coach told them the right technical thing to do. It's because they found their groove, and they kind of figured it out internally how to make it go. So yeah, I think that's a good lesson to know as a coach, that like, as with any athlete, like it's going to come from them. They're going to figure things out, so unless we have more questions from the audience, this is kind of, I think, a good question to end on. Can you share any sort of your best sort of wow moment, memorable experience from your time as a para coach?
Mark started talking about Canada Games. There was 11 or 13 young men who were quite new, relatively within a few years of wheelchair racing. And they all hit the start line for the 1500 meter. And I think the majority of them had never done this race before. And they were awesome. It was one of those moments I got on there. My video is on the YouTube land somewhere, screaming my head off at these kids coming down. And they had just learned drafting because you have to float in and out and follow each other in wheelchair racing and catch the draft like a cyclist. And they were doing it and they all come around this corner. And it was like, it was one of the most exciting, fun things I have seen in wheelchair racing. And my athlete did medal, which was super exciting. Like, figured it all out. And it was so fun to watch all these kids figure out getting off this line and merging in. And yeah, that's definitely my highlight so far.
It's funny. Like I think I already basically told almost the same story, but that same day, you know, our athletes just had major breakthroughs from being around other athletes for a couple of days. And I don't remember another meet in Canada where there was that many people on a start line and that many people taking it serious. And it felt like high performance athletics. And it was just like it was just a real breakthrough moment, I feel like, for parasport in general, because it was, you know, at Canada Games, and it was huge for our athletes. Like it made it seem relevant, and you know, it always has been, but it was at that event that it happened, and there were so many people participating, and the performances were so good. So yeah, that same day, just watching Jeremy, who was the athlete I was with, just watching Jeremy just kind of take it in and grow so much in one day was just wild. So definitely my highlight of coaching wheelchair athletics for sure was that day.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. If there are no more questions, I think that's good. I wanted to highlight, I guess the first link I put with the coaching athletes and disability was seemed to be a broken link. So Kyle has put a better link in there. You've also got your link to the club coach wheelchair in Alberta that Jen's going to be co-leading there. And also our para update next week, all about classification. So lots of opportunities to keep learning. Thanks again, Mark and Jen. You know, as I mentioned, I coached a little bit of wheelchair, just my life situation's changed, so I'm not anymore. But actually, you know, I think my favorite thing or wow moment for me was just on the weekend. I saw the two women that I had been coaching, and I was like, hey, how's it going? And they were just so pumped about Lee. They were like, oh, Lee's the best coach. It's so fun. And I'm just so happy because, you know, I'm like, amazing. So I'm gonna be excited to watch them race this summer. I think it's gonna be fun. So but yeah, like just to that point, like I, you know, learned so much from Jen and others like Tanis and Megan and Marie and Natalie. So there's just a good community of coaches who are doing this. And if you want to do it, reach out and, you know, get connected and get talking, because I think that's really the best way to learn. So thank you for coming and sharing with us today.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks so much.
So see everybody next time.